Welcome back to Tacos and Trends, the podcast by Made Trends, where we explore the intersection of culture, consumer behavior, and the trends shaping tomorrow. You're listening to The Future is Fractional, our limited series exploring how powerful women are reshaping the C-suite, offering real-world, practical insights for growth-minded founders. This week, we're zooming in on marketing, and we're joined by fractional CMO Kat O'Leary to talk about scaling small, positioning with purpose, and why good marketing should never feel like guesswork, and everyone's favorite topic, social media. If you're enjoying this series, hit subscribe, follow, share below with a friend or another founder. And thank you for listening. Hi, Kat.
Hey, Autumn, how are you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're calling in from a very hot Brooklyn. So
Yes,
thank
I
you.
think it's 98 degrees today. Great boy band and not so great forecast.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Okay. So, Kat, we're trying to do two pieces with the podcast here, making sure we're informing our listeners of what all the different roles look like, and then speaking specifically about how you work in a fractional way and what that looks like. So, just to kick things off, could you just give us like high level, what is a CMO?
Yeah, sure. So I think historically, the CMO has really worn many hats, right? It can look a little bit different from one organization to the next. And I think that depends on how established the organization is, how big it is, what phase of growth they're at, et cetera. What we've seen kind of over, I don't know, maybe the past 20 years or so is that the rise of digital capabilities has really changed the CMO role. And so it's caused it to expand pretty significantly to encompass and accommodate all of these new digital technologies and platforms that we're expected to use. And it's really become pretty challenging for CMOs, and especially, I think, more established professionals to keep up with the level of execution required on each of these
Yeah.
different sections of marketing. One of the results of that has been that certain organizations, especially larger ones, have kind of had, some fragmentation of the CMO role and maybe slicing off specific capabilities that might have historically fallen under CMO to create new roles at the C-suite level, so things like chief content officer, chief digital officer, et cetera. And then what's happening simultaneously is, the CMO, it's a C-suite role, it reports up to the CEO. And so the CEO is setting a lot of the priorities for how the CMO goes about their job. As, sort of the CMO role has evolved during, a period of, I'd say, pretty significant, rapid digital transformation kind of across industries, CEOs are wanting to have their CMOs focus on things like top line growth. So demand gen, customer acquisition, things like that. But that really makes it hard to keep an eye on everything else that's mission critical, especially at
Yeah.
an execution level.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think it's interesting as well. And we haven't talked about that yet. I like this idea that it's like considered two different buckets, even if like from a fractional standpoint, which we can get into, like this idea of like chief marketing officer and like chief content officer. I feel like because it really is like it's very broad. There's a lot of work. I think, we've spoke with other people about this before. I feel like the piece of social is so big and so labor intensive that sometimes people haven't understood that at like a CEO level, that like how much time, how much team, how much budget you need, but
Mm-hmm.
that you can't step away from like your like what you are already doing completely. Like it's not like a shift of like, oh, now we do this, right? It's like, oh, and now we do this. And so I think that I imagine like in your role, it's created a lot of like pressure for a lot of people, right? Because you're like, you only as a single person only have so much bandwidth, right? Even if you do
Right.
have like an enormous team.
And you're the
Um,
best, time management person on the
Yeah. But you're
planet.
like, okay, this hat on, this hat off, this hat on, this,
Yep.
right? Because it's like very different. Like, I think whenever you're talking about like all the different roles and all the different capabilities of like a CMO, I think that it's a lot already. And then this like social and this digital piece is enormous. And I think a lot of people are still in that discovery of how big that is and how many resources they need. And how I think as well, and I know you're going to talk about this later as well, is that also like that it requires its own strategy, right? And like someone
Mm-hmm.
and like its own KPIs. So it can't just be like thrown into the bucket as like an afterthought.
Definitely.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit as well about your journey. I know you've had a fascinating career that's really led you to this moment of becoming fractional and being out on your own. So maybe you could give us a little backtrack of like where you started and where you are now.
I've had a pretty long career, so I think I'll start kind of post MBA. I spent several years in content marketing roles at tech startups, which looked a little bit different from one company to the next. So I've been a solo marketer at a couple of organizations. I've been a content marketer operating as part of a team of, I think, 7 people at another fairly early stage startup that just had kind of an outsized marketing team. When I talk about how, things look so different from one organization to the next, I've really lived that in a lot of ways. After, as I said, a few years in content marketing roles, I ended up getting this great opportunity to join the social media team at McKinsey and Company. So I'd had a background in larger orgs before I went to business school. So I was the board liaison at the Metropolitan Opera for 3 years, which was a really incredible
Amazing.
experience that I think looks a little out of step with some of the other things I've done, but ultimately it makes a lot of sense, I think, in the grand scheme of things. So I was there during a period of significant brand transformation, trying to bring opera into the 21st century. We were, really trying to leverage digital as a means of reaching new audiences. And then having that nonprofit experience, I think has actually helped me round out some of my professional experience. And then also has helped me in, the volunteer work and board work that I do in my personal life. So at McKinsey, when I first joined, the team kind of operated as almost a boutique social media agency within the firm. So we were serving internal clients, basically other departments within McKinsey globally. And that experience has actually been really helpful to me later in my career because
I
I've
can
had
imagine.
now time at agencies and now I'm kind of operating as an agency. And so I am used to having to balance a lot of different client needs. But I really, that was a skill that I honed in my first couple of years at McKinsey. And then ultimately, our team really shifted focus to prioritize the corporate level global social handles and really brought everyone in to really figure out how do we innovate and take kind of the at McKinsey corporate level accounts, bring them into where everyone is, including our competitors on social. And so I was at McKinsey for 5.5 years. I thought that was an incredible training ground for me on social. Felt very fortunate to be part of that team. Helped grow our followership across channels 4x to 7 million followers, and ultimately led the organic team as head of social media strategy until I was poached by a startup CEO advisory firm, which I wasn't looking to make a move. This kind of fell out of the sky. And so, one of the things that I think about a lot in terms of my career path is what is the push and pull between where did I have intentionality around very specific things or have this clear
Yeah.
career path as a very goal oriented person versus where did things sort of fall out of the sky and it
Yeah.
just felt like the right thing. And so this was one of those situations, the latter situations. And so joined this firm, led social media client engagements there, worked with large companies across industries and, did some really great work, got to expand. I had exposure to a lot of industries at McKinsey, but I think really managing the day-to-day of brands from one industry to the next just you go a lot deeper when you're kind of owning the brand versus
Yeah.
when you're simply advising someone within your organization on it. And so
Amazing.
I'm thinking about how to talk about the transition from where I was, because that was my last full-time job, hopefully forever. We'll see,
Yeah.
see where life takes me.
Yeah.
For the time being, that was my last corporate job where I was employed by someone else. And I've been gone just about a year now. So there were a couple of things that were,
Congratulations.
yeah, it's really exciting. And I've been kind of thinking about how do I talk about that piece of things publicly? Because I'd like to kind of commemorate the milestone on LinkedIn
Yeah,
or wherever else.
definitely.
But so I think there were a couple of things going on that were a bit challenging for me. One is I didn't feel like my comp was in line with market rates. And I
Yeah.
started having a lot of outreach from recruiters who were basically telling me the same thing. And
Could
then
could I ask you a
two,
question?
yeah,
Could I ask
yeah.
a question there, which also links back to the being poached because I feel like people don't always talk about being poached. Do you feel like you were poached by your internal network? Like that's how that happened? Or did you have a very active LinkedIn?
I was poached through a connection from business school.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's
So
always like I
it was
feel like a lot
LinkedIn,
of
but
times.
there was personally, I think they were looking for someone with social experience who had worked at an organization like McKinsey that
Yeah.
would help legitimize the program that they were building out. So this was a team, a small team, it's a startup team, but of very seasoned people with great corporate backgrounds, a lot of blue chips on their resume, things like that. And so I think that in order to approach the clients that they knew they wanted to land, they were going to need someone with a recognizable kind of household name.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so now just to catch up again. So now we're like 12 months out. So you're
Yep.
unhappy with your comp. You're like this isn't going to work out.
Yeah, and then I think the other big thing is that I just didn't have the headcount I needed.
Yeah.
The headcount
Which
I
is
had was
frustrating.
not appropriate for the amount of work we were doing and the number of engagements. So, I'm very resourceful. As I said, I was in the nonprofit sector early in my career. I'm used to doing a lot with limited resources, and I had the most amazing junior person on my team who I absolutely love and stay in touch with today. Together, we were, if you looked at things on paper, we were very successful. Our numbers looked
Yeah.
phenomenal. I'm really proud of the work we did, but it's also extremely difficult to run, multiple global brand accounts, without more support than that.
Yeah, there's like
And it,
scrappy and then impossible, right?
yeah. And I felt like I was spending a lot of my time trying to justify why I needed additional headcount. And it just became clear that I wasn't going to get it.
That's what happens to a lot of people, right? Like you can see the potential. And I think as well, like as like women and with a certain type of personality, you're like prone to over deliver as one does, speaking for myself as well. But there's a point at where I know we've talked about this like offline as well. There's a point where there's like a tipping point where you're like, well, I don't have any more over deliver. Like there's no more hours. There's like no more like I just can't do anymore. There's, and at some point it's really, you do need more resources.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing about working for someone else is that if I go into a client meeting now and I am, let's say I'm billing a client 10 hours a week or something as a hypothetical, I can advise them on how they're going to get the most value out of my 10 hours a week.
Yeah,
But when
definitely.
you are full time, you're an employee of someone else, you don't have a lot of control over which activities you can say no to.
Yeah.
And I think
Well stated.
when you're not the person whose name is kind of on the masthead at the firm, you're not the founder, you're not the CEO. It can be very hard to, regardless of whose expertise is driving the client project, it can be very hard to uh, get people to agree with you that, oh, actually that thing that you really want to do because stakeholder X says it's the right thing, that's actually
Yeah.
not a good use of your time or resources or my time
Yeah.
or resources. And I think it's easier to optimize when
Yeah.
I'm
Agreed.
just me, or when it's me
Yeah.
and other people in my network who I've pulled in
Yeah.
on projects.
No, I agree as well. I often like go like we respond to like a lot of RFPs or we go to pitches as well, and I'm always like, okay, this part for me we don't need to do. Like if let's actually this we could cut out, or we could like leverage this other piece of work, or I agree as well. I like this as well, like optimizing like resources. Obviously, we're like always looking to win the biggest account possible and like the big budgets, but as well, like I think people appreciate that as well. Whenever you can like control, like okay, this is where I could add like my secret sauce, right? This is where
Mhm.
you're going to get the most value out of me. There's like extra if you want, like me or my team or like my company. But yeah, I think being able to like be the like navigate that ship yourself is very empowering. And then I think then the results like speak for themselves as well. And I think as well, like clients appreciate whenever they're like, oh, we see what you carved out, you delivered, like over delivered.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that's like very, very well stated. Yeah,
Thank
very well
you.
stated.
Yeah.
And so now I know because we know each other, I know you kind of have like two different pathways or almost like two different tracks. So the last 12 months, I think it's interesting as well. I'm going to just take like one step back. It's interesting how there's like shifts because like for before this, like so much conversation came up about fractional, I wouldn't have been like, oh, you're a fractional CMO. I would have, for me, the only fractionals that existed were the ones that I didn't want to have, which was like fractional CFO, because I don't really
Mhm.
want to have a CFO, or like the fractional CEO who's like going to boss me around whenever I really want to be the
Yep.
boss. But I didn't think about all these other roles. Like for me, it would have been like, oh, like you have an agency. Like for myself as well, like, oh, like we have an agency. But it really seems like it's trendy that everyone's talking about, no, it's like fractional, like your fractional C-suite. And so it's the shift in mentality is interesting. So as you're building your fractional work, which at the same time is like building your agency, I know that you've like been focusing mainly on like two different like vias. Could you give us like a little bit like behind the curtain of like how you're actually working with clients and how you're actually engaging and how that works for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you said, I kind of have two sort of parallel tracks. One
Mhm.
is my fractional CMO role. So, I work for this amazing organization called Wings Women of Discovery that funds the top women scientists, explorers, and conservationists worldwide. So,
Love it.
if you can name a woman scientist, we've probably worked with her in the
Amazing.
past 21 years. Incredible organization, so meaningful. It's just I'm very fortunate that this is kind of, how I spend 15 hours of my weeks, sometimes 20 depending on what's happening. And so that's about roughly half of my time is in that role. And then the other half of my time I run Knockout Creative, which is I say mostly solopreneurial. It is it kind of ebbs and flows. I have people I can pull in as needed for different
Yeah.
things, but for the most part, I'm the one with my current clients doing the work. But that's essentially a social and content strategy shop. And so right now, I work primarily with tech startup clients. I've talked to, I've worked in the past with kind of larger organizations, and I think it's really interesting because it's sort of from one organization to the next, there's just so much difference in, how even within like kind of a similar industry like tech, how the marketing teams are structured, who leads
Yeah.
the team, who my point of contact is at the client, whether I'm dealing with everyone across the marketing team or if there's kind of one person choosing to be sort of my liaison to everyone else. And so it's been really interesting to figure out like how to piece together a work week that allows me to
Yeah.
make sure that I am, balancing all of these competing priorities. Because I think with Wings, especially, and having that fractional CMO role, I do have this sense of duty that even if I'm only fractional, I want it to appear that I am always available during work hours, particularly to the CEO who I report to, but also to our board. I want to be accountable to them. And if they, reach out to me and I'm, let's say like, oh, I've already kind of gotten through my hours for the week, I will pop back in and make sure those questions are answered. So I
Yeah.
think one of the sort of kind of more like maybe creative sides of being, some kind of fractional CXO is limiting your hours, but also making it seem like you
Yeah.
are a fully available C-suite leader.
Exactly. So I think it's about like it's crazy because it's like completely like opposites, right? You're like, okay, limiting hours, but I'm still always on, right?
Right,
Because I think
exactly.
part of the secret sauce, I agree, is that like being integrated into the teams, right? Also building that relationship and like being that extension that they need. I think it's challenging. And I also think so I have a question because people are in two camps. Are you trying to condense make sure all of your work in the perfect world does all of your work fall between like a normal like 9 to 5 or so I feel like people are either in that camp or they're like oh no because I like to take afternoons off and I find like a lot of my client base is called wants to call like I know like a lot of like CEOs who we work with they like want to call in the morning in the car on the way to the office where there aren't any like ears listening or they want to call after hours when all of like
Mhm.
the work day is over. So how what's your perfect mix or what do you prefer? Are you
Yeah,
still
that's a
trying to
great
figure it out?
question, and I'm sure you will get so many answers on this because people work so differently.
Yeah.
And so, I do, I think I kind of think about my week as kind of like an ombre week, if
Oh,
this
okay,
makes sense.
okay.
So
Okay, let's hear.
basically, I think the ideal week for me is that I front load honestly up to like 12 hours on Monday and
Yep.
Tuesday, and then sort of reduce how much I'm working toward the end of the week. I started out with the goal of doing a 4-day work week.
Okay.
I will say that's been
Okay.
very challenging because
Yeah.
there are certain things where
Yeah.
there are certain things where I don't mind breaking that boundary, right? Like if it's, we need to have a committee meeting that's, for the next 4 months and it has to be every other Friday. That's fine because if that's when it
Yeah.
works for others, it's not like I'm doing anything crazy on Fridays. Most of the time I'm just trying to like take that time to build my business and to
Yeah.
do the stuff that that it's very easy to make excuses not to do because
Yeah, yeah.
you're on deadline, etc. So that is sort of how things have worked to date. I do think ideally I would take Fridays off, but not off like not working, really more off in
Yeah.
terms of giving myself some white space, allowing myself to kind of do more creative visioning around my business. And then I also have a lot of, creative projects outside of work that I frankly would like to spend more time on. And working for myself makes that easier, but also harder in some ways because
Definitely.
it can be hard to justify taking time away from building something that,
Definitely.
is really for you.
No, and I think as well, whenever you're like, I think you said it really well, when you're like building the business, that's literally a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like then when you're also like servicing like the clients, that's also a full-time job. So it's really hard. I myself have a really hard time like balancing this. I feel like what in the beginning, all day long, very long client hours. And then I realized like in the evenings and on the weekends is whenever I was doing all of the like business building. Then I had a small child who doesn't sleep. And I was like, oh, I can't
Yep.
work all night and all weekend. And then I was like, wow, I really need to like question how we're running things as well. And like what I can and can't do. But that was also empowering because I think kind of how some people start, I had kind of started just like seeing how things were going to roll, like without a big vision. And so I think it's important to like, you literally have to like block out that time because, I think as well as, this as like a marketer, right? Actually have to be like always like building, always filling up the funnel for like new clients, but that takes a lot of time. And it also takes like a lot of massaging and like you have to be dedicated to it, not because you need that today, but in 3 years you may need like new leads, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
you need to be able, and the market shifts. So, and I think as well, you hit on another point that like really resonates with me as well, because obviously as like a forecaster, we do like a lot of creative like concepting as well, is that you have to have enough space to like recharge the like creative juices, which
Mm-hmm.
is not normally happening in like a Zoom meeting. I'm the same way. Like I need to go to a museum, I need to travel somewhere,
Yep.
I need like new visual inputs just so I can come and I can be like energized about like the new creative ideas. Not that it makes me like less strategic, but much like you, like my strategy needs to have creative behind it. So I feel like that's like, then you're like, oh, okay, now I'll add that into it as well.
1,000%.
So I feel like that's always really difficult. So I always, and I know we've danced around this topic before. And so maybe just tell me a little bit, like as a CMO running your own business, do you have like top three priorities of you're like, okay, these are non-negotiable at my own business, or what's the
Hmm.
behind the curtain, Kat? I think
Oh,
I know what
that's
the answer is, but I'm interested to see how it comes out here. I think I know what it is.
okay. Well, I don't know if I have an answer prepared for this one. Let me think. Why don't you tell me what you think my answer would be,
I
and then
think
that might jog
I
something
I
loose on
think
my end.
I think for me, which I think we kind of both agreed about, the hardest thing for me is to apply my own work to my own business. I
Okay.
can see
Yes.
your business. I'm like, I get your strategy. Your strategy is very clear. We can execute, we can deliver it, we can follow up, all of those. But whenever it's like time to like apply that to our own organization, I'm like, oh, I don't really want to do that. Or I'm like more fickle about it, or I don't know what it is. If it's like it's like too emotional for me, but I can't see it in as black and white and to execute it in a timely way. And so then I like that you've like carved out a day for it, because then otherwise if you it kind of like requires you get it done. But I think and for creatives specifically, that's sometimes the hardest part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's made me more empathetic to, I ghost write LinkedIn content for CEOs, right? That's part of what
Yeah.
I offer. And it has made me a lot more empathetic to people who are reluctant to post what I hand them. And
Oh,
even if
yeah.
they like it, and because I've
Yeah.
had clients in the past, both in my own work and then previously when working for others, where I will, or my team will sit down and spend all this time writing, LinkedIn posts for
Yeah.
executives, only to just send it off and just never hear anything again. And none of it ever sees the light of day.
Wait, that's what I
And
do.
yeah, and it's
I'm
very,
guilty of that.
yeah. So, well, I have empathy for you because I know how hard it is. And I wonder in that case, if like for someone like you, where it's hard to like get that over the finish line, maybe you want to hand the keys to your LinkedIn to someone that you really trust, where
Yeah.
you almost don't need to know about it. And like if anything crazy comes up, like you'll see that, or if there's a meaningful interaction that comes out of it, then you can jump in and reply and whatever. But I also think it's like a muscle that you have to exercise. And
Yeah.
so this is me giving advice that I personally need to hear, right?
Yeah, no, I need
And
to
I think
no, that's why I wanted you to hit it.
you have to really get comfortable with that kind of cringy feeling of, I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with self-promotion. I don't think that's quite the issue for me personally. I think with me, it's like more like, I don't know, I'm worried that I'm not hitting my own messaging like
Yeah.
exactly. I'm not like, sticking the landing, whatever it is. And because what I do is write things on behalf of others, I need to make sure that I'm showing up in a way that connects with people, feels meaningful, um, resonates, etc. But I don't know. There are a few things that have made this easier. One, I've tried to let go of attachment to metrics, which as a social media
Oh,
professional is really hard to do
okay.
because I am used to either the numbers go up or it's a failure over the length of a
Yeah.
program. It doesn't every post doesn't need to knock it out of the park. Sometimes I will have a LinkedIn post that if you looked at it, it looks like a flop, but it has led to meaningful lead conversations. And so the person
Oh,
might
yeah.
not like the post publicly, but they will shoot me a DM or send me an email and say, "Hey, I really love your LinkedIn content recently. Would you want to could we have a meeting and talk about how you might be able to help my firm with X?" Or I recently
Which is like
had
exactly what you want, right? Like
exactly
that's
like
like,
that's more meaningful. That is a
yeah.
meaningful metric.
Yeah.
A hundred reactions to some throwaway post complaining about the state of social today or the LinkedIn algorithm, that doesn't get money in my pocket,
Exactly.
and it doesn't build meaningful relationships. But if I'm willing to like lean in a little bit, be vulnerable, there might be people who are uncomfortable interacting publicly. It could be that
Yeah.
their boss is they know their boss is going to see whatever they do and might
Yeah.
be perceiving things a certain way. It might be that they just they're just not that's not how they consume social or interact with social. But some of those people, they're the people who you most want to reach. And so and
Definitely.
it is not always going to be a situation where like, oh, I posted that thing 3 days ago and I've generated no leads. It could be like 2 months later, someone's like, "Hey, I've seen this kind of drumbeat
Build.
of content from this person." I had, for example, I had a classmate slash friend from business school reach out to me about potentially co-authoring a book, right? And so it's like that's something where I
Yeah.
didn't even know that he was seeing my LinkedIn posts, but then we had this conversation and rekindled our friendship, and now we're talking about a partnership. So it's things like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but no, but it's crazy, like, but if you don't build it, then you don't have any of it, but it's very difficult. I think that's a very good point of and I've heard this from a few other people that you wouldn't expect, like, they're like, "No, like, all of my social, all of my LinkedIn has to be run by someone else," and it's that as well, and it's not like someone else actually has to be in charge of the posting. The amount of content ready for my LinkedIn, but my LinkedIn has nothing on it. Like, it hasn't been
Yep.
updated, like, for, like, since I started the business a decade ago. Maybe there's something here or there, but it is really challenging. I think that's like a good point. And I think as well, it's like, it is like vulnerable. And I also think as well that there's a lot of people who are successful. And think it happens with like women a lot as well, who are like also not only focused on metrics, but also on like perception and perfectionism.
Mhm.
And so that can be like your, like, honestly, your biggest strength, but also in your own branding and in your own work. I feel like myself, it's like definitely like put like held me back where I was like, oh, it's not perfect enough. Well, I feel like someone told me the other day because it's a problem I run into a lot. They were like, "Well, just sitting in your inbox where no one sees it, it's definitely not perfect." And I'm like, "Oh, good point.
Mhm.
Good point. Good point."
Yeah. And
So yeah.
also you can't iterate until you've done something. You need to do kind of the kind of MVP version. Like maybe you're not going to get everything right. You're not going to see the reactions you want every single time, but you need to be able to kind of build up over time. The other thing is that the LinkedIn algorithm really rewards consistency. And so, I think the goal should be ideally post twice a week. I think that's a hard
Okay.
cadence to keep up with when you are
Yeah.
trying to, actually do your work aside from
Yeah.
that. But if you do it, once a week, twice a month, something like that, you will be rewarded for it. It does drive greater engagement when you're in people's feeds more often. And that's
That's
information from the
interesting.
the team at LinkedIn versus some random, social media expert who may or may not have data.
Yeah. Okay, who's in your Instagram feed.
Yep.
Understood. So, okay. So and if you're building a business or you're trying to build your like fractional network, you definitely think there's like a need to lean into LinkedIn.
I do, unfortunately. Sad
Let's
to
do it,
say, and not
Kat.
just because it's how part of how I make money, but I do see people, really having success on that platform,
Yeah.
and especially now that LinkedIn is kind of pushing individual creators or
Yeah.
professionals over brands.
That makes a huge
It
difference.
it's not just, and I think this is a good selling point for, leaders within a business who are maybe reluctant. It's very hard to succeed on LinkedIn at this point without an executive social program to support the
Yeah.
brand social program.
Yeah. That's like, I feel like that's very clearly stated. No, that's so I'm like thinking, Kat, and my like creative brain is like, oh my God, do we need to have like a challenge for our listeners of like, here's how, like, here's, you're going to like compete on having like 2 posts a week because it's so hard to like, keep up with. But I love that. Like when you hear like 2 posts a week or 1 post a month, that's really not that much. But
Hmm.
like, I think when you're not in the practice of like doing that exercise, right? It's like, I feel like once you're in the habit, it's much easier. But when you're not, it's like the first day back at the gym. It's always hard.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be something earth shattering every single time. It could just be, well, on Tuesday, I post my main post of the week where I've actually thought something out and just, put my ideas down. And then maybe on Thursday, I post a photo from a recent event that I was at, or I just post a link that I thought was interesting and some commentary on it. And then maybe drop the link in comments because LinkedIn doesn't always like it when you put your link in the post now and all of
Yeah.
that. But yeah, I think it's figure out what is the lowest hanging fruit way that you can figure out how to stay consistent,
Okay.
and you will see benefits from that.
Okay. Okay, great. On that as well. So as we wrap up here, can rapid fire, could I get
Yep.
3 like metrics you feel like every founder or fractional should be like focused on after we just talked about like metrics aren't everything, but we know people are talking. So if people ask you like from the hip, like what are like the 3 metrics I should be keeping my eye on?
Yeah, so here's one that everyone hates and is keeps trying to tell me is not important anymore, and I absolutely don't agree. Impressions. I think growth in
Okay.
impressions is still an
Yeah.
extremely meaningful metric. It matters for brand awareness, and it matters to let are you creating the right messaging for your audience, and are you doing it in the right format? So
Mhm.
that number to me is the one, especially if, when I come in and work with clients, that's the thing I focus on first.
Okay.
And we can focus on engagement later. And also in a lot of situations, I will also see engagement rise with that.
Okay.
But to me, that's the number you're going to see grow the fastest and the soonest after you kind of shift your strategy, even in tiny ways. Or even if you're not shifting your strategy, if it's something like we're sticking with the same messaging, but we now know how to optimize our content formats for LinkedIn. Like maybe we were doing,
Yeah.
horizontal images, and now we know we should do vertical to take up more space in the feed when people are scrolling, or really tiny, tiny granular tweaks like that, I think can really lead to big wins. So that's
Okay.
one.
Okay.
Two, I would say is brand sentiment.
Okay.
So I think this is, it's a lot harder to measure. Impressions, you can kind of look in your analytics platform and the numbers either go up or down, or they stay the same. Sentiment's a little bit harder to measure, but I do think it's really important to track just to understand how and really if people are talking and thinking about you and your organization, and to kind of flag anything that might be kind of not what you want them saying, or some misperceptions that you can
Yeah.
correct through content. And then also, I think it serves as a protective layer when you have a crisis. If you have a really strong or a brand that's really beloved in the marketplace, that can really help you weather a storm if something goes wrong, assuming that you are savvy enough to resolve the crisis, or respond to it in a way that aligns with what consumer perception is.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Um,
Go ahead, please.
I was going to move on to number 3, unless you have a
Yeah, yeah,
question about
please,
this
please,
one.
please. No, no, no.
Yeah.
I'll save my questions for the end. You just have my
Okay.
like the wheels are turning here,
Yeah.
Kat.
Great. So number 3, and look, I don't know. This is to me, this is a very important metric. It's not a marketing metric, but employee attrition. So
Mhm.
to me, a revolving door is just a really, really bad sign. And it
Yeah.
can mean a number of things. One, it can mean that your employees aren't getting the growth opportunities they need. So there's kind of that sort of like emotional basis for wanting to leave, right? and
Yeah.
and and also, thinking longer term about their career. Two, and we talked about this a little bit, but maybe your comp slash benefits package isn't a match for the talent that you have on the team, and isn't enough to retain them, in which case you might want to think about that a little bit. And then 3, your culture may need some work. And I think there are a lot of organizations that think that they have put a lot of work into culture, that maybe what they what senior leadership perceives to be the culture, and what
Yeah.
junior employees are experiencing as the culture, there might be a mismatch there. And you need to find out if people are leaving, why.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. I think that's great. I feel like you cover like a broad range there. And then I always think this one's like interesting as well. I feel like these are like very applicable insights. So what's the most common brand mistake you see in this like new landscape where we're all working?
Yeah. So I think the big thing that I'm seeing right now is being unhinged without strategy behind it. And so this is really, I'd say this is primarily a social situation, right? A lot of brands have really built their follower bases on kind of unhinged out there
Yeah.
marketing. So kind of the uh, person who really sort of started all of this is this woman, Amy Brown, who used to manage the Wendy's Twitter account. And I had an opportunity to speak with her a few weeks ago, and she's just a lovely person. And I would love to pick her brain for hours on everything. But that kind of unhinged nature has sort of evolved to a place now where like people are going farther and farther in terms of like what they're putting out there.
Yeah.
Um, and, I'm not a B2C marketer, but I do watch consumer brands pretty closely and with
Yeah.
interest, both as a consumer and then also because there are a lot of great takeaways from B2C that you
Definitely.
can apply to B2B and vice versa. And so I think the big concern here is, we've kind of reached like peak unhinged
Yeah.
recently. And I think there's a danger of reputational risk. If you
Yeah.
go too far, it might be like, well, you're not even talking about your brand or product or whatever anymore. I'm
Yeah.
kind of sick of this. Let me, unfollow or just stop engaging with your content. Or, if you don't consider all of the angles, like, is there something, don't make a reference to something that actually kind of corresponds to something that's happening in the news that doesn't have anything to do with what you're promoting,
Yeah.
but it ends up being in poor taste because you got the timing wrong,
Yeah.
or things like
Definitely.
that. And then the other thing is like when you are pushing your brand to be super unhinged, how is that aligning with business goals? Because I think with
Yeah.
social, my big thing is like, it's not just this fun thing that we're all looking at, clicking on, watching videos, et cetera. It always has to have some relationship to business strategy, or you're not going to get the buy-in from the top that you need in order to get the resources you need to
Indeed.
continue to grow your social program.
Yeah.
And
Definitely.
so for example, like Duolingo, I think has done amazing things on social as far as pushing things more and more unhinged, and they're a hilarious team, and it's clear that their leadership has a lot of trust in them.
Yeah.
But if one of my questions for them would be, how is all of this corresponding to growth in user acquisition?
Yeah.
Um, and
No,
I think that always kind
agreed.
of has to be the question.
No, and I think as well, I think there is like definitely a moment where like being unhinged is like very trendy, right? We know Gen Z loves it. It feels relatable. But
Hmm.
then also I think you from like a strategist like mindset, you always have to be thinking about like what's next and like how do you go from like unhinged isn't going to be trendy forever. So how do you go from
Yep.
there to like what's the long-term view whenever like we need to like step back from being unhinged? I agree because some of the there's we normally reference like 5 or 6 like different including Duolingo, who I do think did a really good job, but the unhinged content, you're like, "Ooh, like where's the end point of this?" And like
Yeah.
again, as well, like it's great for it to have like a moment, but I think it also like with everything, I think your mindset's very similar to mine. Like everything has to be strategic for the exact reason you said this, because we're going to need to get like buy-in because we need money to like keep moving
Exactly.
forward.
Yeah, and is the audience you're reaching with what you're pushing out on social, is that the same as the paying customer? Because
Yeah.
I've been a Duolingo subscriber for years, not because of the unhinged social content, but I
Yeah.
don't know anything about has this driven, to my point earlier, has this driven user acquisition on the Gen Z side? And in similar cases, um, you know, let's make sure that it's tied to long-term strategy and goals and that there's a plan to shift as the market shifts.
Definitely, definitely. And as we wrap up here, I think you already hit it, but your like biggest, I think I would have a key takeaway, but just like a non-paid like tip of like for success on social,
Yeah,
whatever your social
absolutely.
channels.
Yep, sure. I think it's consistency, as we did discuss earlier. Um, it trumps all across channels. I would advocate for putting out lower quality or less exciting content to be able to keep to a regular cadence of posting over
Yeah.
posting, once a month or once a quarter, whatever it is. Yeah, so consistency is king to me.
Okay, amazing. And we like to wrap up always favorite taco since we're here on tacos and trends.
Yep. Baja fish, always
Okay, grilled or fried?
fried.
Of course. Okay, good, good, good. I'm glad we're aligned there.
Yep.
And Kat, I feel like you had so many like great takeaways, which we're going to recap in the notes below. But also, if people want to learn more, they want to connect, how, where do they find you? Give us all of the everything.
Yeah, sure. So I think the best places to find me, other than obviously LinkedIn, which I have to plug since I just said,
Yeah.
and this is good because this will force me to get consistent between
Good,
now
good.
and when the episode goes live.
No,
But
me
I'm
too. Me
also,
too.
yeah, I'm
I made
also
like a
on,
little note right here.
love it, love it. Great accountability. We can do this.
Mm.
So I'm also on Instagram. My personal account is just at Kat O'Leary, and then my business is at Knockout Creative Co. And then you can also learn more about my work at knockoutcreative.co. That's my website.
Okay, amazing. All those will be linked below and across our social handles as well, and on some like LinkedIn posts we're going to make, Kat.
Amazing.
Kat O'Leary, thank you so much. This was amazing. Tons of great tips and hints and a lot to digest and think about. It was a pleasure. Thank you for your time and for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Autumn. This was a blast.
This is amazing.